Okay, I hope now everyone can see the screen. Yes. Okay,
Okay,
hello.
hello.
Am I
Am I
audible
audible
now?
now?
Yes,
Oh,
sir, you are audible.
yeah, but try to just turn on your. Pankaj, you cannot hear you anymore. Please turn on your microphone again.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In that case, yeah, this is better. I'm really sorry for this. Is this better now?
Yeah, now we can hear you perfectly.
Is this all okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. All right. So I was saying that we also experienced a lockdown period and it's still going on. And we thought that we can use the time productively and then came up with a list of projects which we had already planned few years back when we started citizen science on dragonflies. So here is a glimpse of what all information that we have collected and how we are using this information. These projects are actually an amalgamation of various ideas that we had over the years that we have developed, and new students have joined, and now these projects are executed. So in today's talk, I will primarily talk on dragonflies and damselflies, citizen science, the idea of citizen science, how it evolves, what kind of analysis is expected in citizen science, how you can involve more and more people into the citizen science, and then finally I'll summarize this talk. So let's move on to the first topic, that is dragonflies and damselflies. These tiny freshwater aquatic insects, these are everywhere around us, and they come up with so much of variety in coloration, shape, and sizes. And they are quite fascinating insects. They have a very interesting evolutionary history, very interesting, fascinating ecologies they have. And they show tremendous variety in terms of behavior and, the flight patterns and so on. So there are so many interesting stories about these insects which can capture your attention and you may want to study them. And we often see them around wetlands, but it's only a few times that we actually notice the presence of insects in general. In 2009, one paper was published, and this paper highlighted the importance of odonates and how we are sort of underestimating their presence. In fact, the odonates, the dragonflies and damselflies put together, they entered into the biodiversity crisis debate. And this world map shows what is the proportion of threatened odonates in a particular region or country. So looking at this world map, it looks like there are only a few odonates threatened across the globe, but actually there are a lot many knowledge gaps. For instance, even today, many odonate species are not assessed in the IUCN Red List. So if you go to IUCN Red List and find out the status of certain species, it will come as data deficient or not assessed. So that is something which is very concerning. And it's also, I think, one of the biggest knowledge gap that we have, that we don't have data on geographical and the temporal distribution of many odonates of the world. So if you look at particularly in Asia, especially India, you find that India has two biodiversity hotspots. One is the Western Ghats and the second is the Indo-Myanmar hotspot. But even in both these hotspots, we don't really see threatened odonates. So does that really mean that there are no threatened odonates in these areas? Or does that mean that they are not perhaps properly assessed, and because of which we don't really have data to say anything about them? Well, the authors in the paper discuss these two hotspots, and they say that there are quite a lot of knowledge gaps when it comes to certain areas of the world. And it's because of these scarcity of data on the geographical and temporal distribution of the species. IUCN is not updating their status as what threatened group they belong to. So overall, globally, the problem is same, that in many areas, we don't really know a lot about odonates even now. So it means that this is the right time to go for meta-analysis of the data that has been collected by people, and also try to engage more and more people into odonata research. So we have to create an ecosystem where we can derive data, as well as there will be a loop in which people will be continuously feeding data, biodiversity data or the dragonfly diversity data, which can be used later on for conservation purposes. So looking at the global odonata stats, as of now, the latest updated list by Paulson and Shore, it mentions 6,313 odonates globally, of which around 50% are dragonflies and 50% are damselflies. And then there are 4 dragon damselflies, which is another suborder. But we mainly concern with the dragonflies and damselflies because they make the major proportion of odonates. If you compare the Indian odonata stats with the global odonata stats, we have around 500 species in India, and of which around 186 species are endemic species. So I think that is where the concern really comes in picture, because a huge proportion of the total number of species in India are endemic. And the endemism is, the main areas where the endemism is found is the Western Ghats and the Northeast mountains. So again, the two biodiversity hotspots, which has been talked a lot in the other literature as well. So if you look at only the number of species that we have in India, they make around 7.7% of the world odonata. So that is still a huge chunk of odonata species diversity that occurs in a single country, or that occurs in a single region as such. So it means that there is a lot of scope in terms of generating data, as well as collecting data, analyzing it, and coming up with new assessments. So if you want to refer to these, statistics, you can go to the links given. You can refer those literature. So the interesting thing is that although we know a lot about the Indian species, new species are getting discovered. And this is the latest. This is a new species of dragonfly that was discovered in Konkan region. And this is published in, around in the month of May 2020. So newer and newer species are getting published every year. And this is again sort of because of the power of citizen science that we have established. So this is actually a success story. There is a portal called Odonata of India, which is actually a citizen science contributed portal. And people keep on taking pictures of the dragonflies within the Indian region, and they post on this website. So if anything new comes up, if anything, any new species look like comes up, then the moderators go back and they check, and there are some success stories related to citizen science contributed data. So what exactly is the word citizen science? What exactly is meant by that? So let's have a look at the second topic, that is citizen science. It's actually a collective public participatory effort, and in which typically biodiversity data is collected. And many a times these collective efforts have a proper aim. A certain scientific question is answered by the collective effort of the people. So there are many ways by which citizen science works in various countries. In our case, since I'm talking about dragonflies, I'll be talking more about the citizen science movement with respect to the dragonflies. Now, dragonflies are such an insect that they are not very glamorous. They're not very, beautiful looking as compared to butterflies or, other species like birds. Or they're also not having very mysterious, stories about them, such as tigers and rhinoceros. But still, dragonflies have some unique characters which attract people. And I think that is the one common thread which connect different people. So when you find a group of people who are like-minded and who think that, yes, dragonflies are very beautiful and I want to study them, then they become a part of the network that we create. So that is what we call as citizen science. So this person may not have a scientific background. He or she may not have a right academic background for the research, but given proper training and given correct tools and techniques, they can actually collect data which will be really enormous in amount, as well as will be really qualitative data. So this is the aim of citizen science, and that is what I think. That given a scientific question, you can answer the question either by putting individual efforts or a group effort or a community effort. So here we are talking more about the community effort. And if the question is answered in a very systematic manner, then even the community participation can be really, really helpful. In fact, the journey of citizen science is quite interesting. Typically, at least in India, this is what is happening. That typically people, they think that there is a need for data. Now, why do they need data is because of several factors. So one of these things could be they're working in a region, for example, Western Ghats, and they think that from my location, there is no data. I don't know what exists here. So I want someone to come with me and collect data. So that is the need for data. Some people say that I want to do a long-term monitoring. I want to know what was here, a few years back, what will be in the next future, coming future, and so on. So I want someone to be present and who will always contribute data. So that is my need for data. So there are various aspects which can actually push you towards collecting data. Some people ask very systematic scientific questions and they set up methods, whereas some people ask exploratory scientific question. Still, you need some data. So need for data is quite ubiquitous, and you often need data for any research project. So once the need for data is identified, then people start connecting with each other. Perhaps it starts with a very small group, 2 to 3 people coming together and collecting data. Eventually they think that, okay, let's put it on social media. Let's create a Facebook group, let's create a WhatsApp group, and so on. And then they start creating networks. Now more and more people get involved in this, and a bigger and bigger, the network becomes bigger and bigger in size. If a proper data collection procedure is applied, people start collecting data, and then it is either put on a website or a social media or a proper platform. So there are various ways by which people are contributing towards data generation. The most famous one is the Facebook. There are various groups, and people post their images or their records, their observations, or sometimes calls, and they say that look, I found this one, and I know the species. Or sometimes they ask, what is the species? So there are various ways by which people start interacting with the bigger network that we have been creating. The other way to look at it is that people go to certain portals. These are citizen science portals, which are designed in such a manner that people go there to deposit their data. And they go to certain portals because they want their data to be preserved as a research grade observation, which other researchers can use or they themselves can use later on. So there are two ways to do it, either websites or social media, or there could be other ways like apps also. Eventually app leads to a certain repository where the data is deposited. Now, after putting your data in a certain platform, either social media or websites, the data also has to be retrievable in case you want to analyze your data set. But there are two types of people. One are contributors who are very eager or keen to contribute data, and other are researchers or people who conduct analysis or analysts as such. So they are more interested in the output. They are more interested in collection of the data, in the sense that they get numbers and they can analyze those. So in any case, if you are a contributor or an analyst, you will be more interested in knowing whether the data that you deposit is again accessible to you or not. Okay, so I mean, is it really making a loop, or is it just going in one direction? So the free download or the downloadable data is something that is a questionable entity. And here I think many disputes happen because some portals do not give you access, some portals give you access. For example, the eBird portal where citizen science data is posted. If you request for data, they do give you data, so you have access to the data. Whereas in some portals, there is no direct access. So that is a slightly gray area. But eventually what happens is that this data finally gets analyzed by certain research groups or some people who started the citizen science group themselves. And eventually it leads to generation of knowledge, or the output is used for conservation. So that is typically the journey of a citizen science project. And this is exactly the same journey that we are following with the dragonflies. So what is it that we are doing with the dragonflies? Now, the journey of citizen science, as I mentioned, that although it's, there is a cause and effect, you want data and, you create a network, but at the same time, it's a process. And when we start a citizen science process, we also create very strong social networks, which are dedicated to a common goal. And this builds friendship, collaborations, and it's a great tool for spreading conservation awareness. Something that, some groups are actually very much oriented towards awareness, achieving awareness, and that's why the networks are created. Whereas some groups are more oriented toward data collection, and that's why the networks are created. In any case, any social network which is dedicated to a common goal of biodiversity conservation will always be a very strong network, and it will always, lead to conservation awareness in either, in either ways. So citizen science is not only about collecting data systematic manner. It also about collecting or joining hands together for a collective common cause. So with the dragonflies, we have this group called Dragonfly South Asia, and there is quite a history about this particular group, so which I'll talk in a few minutes. But this group right now, we have more than 9,000 people who are following dragonflies, and all these people come from various academic background and various research background. Some of them are actually not researchers or not at all having academic background of science as such, but they all love dragonflies and they want to conserve them, and that's why they're together and they're depositing data as and where they go. So these are some of the pictures from the various initiatives of the Dragonfly South Asia group. And although ours is a more of a virtual forum, we do conduct many meetings. These are called Dragonfly South Asia meetings, which is typically a 3 to 4 days of workshop in which we train people in the art of dragonfly watching. And then, these friendships created or the network created remains for a really, really long duration. I mean, we have become a really huge family now. So this is the history or the evolution of Dragonfly South Asia group over the time. started in 2005. So around 15 years back, the group started. And when it started, it was a simple Yahoo group. And in the Yahoo group, we used to exchange emails. At that time, there was no concept of Facebook, actually. I mean, Facebook was not accessible to anyone. So people were relying more on the emailing lists. And in 2009, we migrated to Facebook because many users started using Facebook, and the Yahoo email group became sort of dormant. So we moved to Facebook, and then we started expanding in the Facebook as a group. And in 2011, various new admins were added to the group to better manage the group. We also created a iNaturalist project. iNaturalist is a citizen science portal. It's a very beautiful website dedicated to citizen science. So you can post your data in it, and it eventually becomes a research grade observation after few moderations. So in 2011, we moved to iNaturalist as well, keeping our Facebook presence as it is. And in 2014, the Dragonfly India meeting started. So when we started, our name was Dragonfly India because the group was limited to Dragonfly India. And in 2014, we started these meetings. And then people, even from the nearby countries, they started joining us in the meetings because there was no platform for the Dragonfly research or Dragonfly related discussion happening at a scientific level. So people started just flowing in. So in 2017, we transformed to Dragonfly South Asia because of the overwhelming response of the people from neighboring countries. So we were not really limited to India, but also from, there were responses from other countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bhutan, and so on. So we changed the name to Dragonfly South Asia in 2017. In 2018, we also, the Dragonfly South Asia group featured on a TEDx talk. And in 2010, because of the lockdown and because we were all homebound, we thought that we cannot have a physical meeting as such. So we created a virtual meeting. And this virtual meeting basically spanned almost 10 days. And every day there used to be lectures. We went one step ahead in just last few months. We also featured some regional talks because we think that conservation is quite it's a regional discipline as such, and people need to understand about their dragonfly diversity in their own regional languages. There are so many regional languages in India, and people can get connected to the nature in the best possible ways. And one of the ways is the talking to them in regional languages so that they can understand what is happening with their landscape. So this is how the evolution of Dragonfly South Asia looks like. This is the 15 years of journey. And over the years, there has been a lot of data that has been deposited or accumulated in Dragonfly South Asia. So our Facebook group has around 7,950 members, which are managed by 12 admins. There are more than 13,000 data records on the Facebook group itself. And there are many DSA partners as well. So DSA is actually a part of Diversity India, which is an umbrella group under which there are many small citizen science projects. Dragonfly India was one of them. But eventually the Dragonfly India grew actually bigger than the Indian territory. And now it is including the nearby countries as well. So there are many partners through which we work, we conduct these workshops, and they always help us in various ways possible. If you look at our iNaturalist project, we have around 2,000 or 3,000 observations in the iNaturalist project, and this is how the map looks like. We have got a good coverage of the Western Ghats and some parts of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, but many parts of India, especially the central India and the Northwest and parts of the Northeast and Himalayas, there we don't really have much presence, or we don't really have many observations coming from these areas. So looking at this map, there are definitely some knowledge gaps that need to be filled in. And this data, the new data that comes up using the iNaturalist portal, perhaps can be useful for the research, taking the research to the next level. So this is only a subset of the data. I talked about the Facebook group, which is having a huge, user base, and people keep on frequently posting images there. The only problem so far for us was that accessing the Facebook data. I mean, it's really, really difficult to download the Facebook data, extract the information, and use it for research. Now, I know that there are obvious questions that whether the Facebook data is reliable or not, but we'll come to that later. So with the Dragonfly South Asia group, we always had few things in mind. One was that we need to provide a platform for the people so that they can post their observations. That was the first thing. Second thing was to generate interest in public so that more and more people join hands and they provide more and more data. And eventually at some point, we want to analyze the data so that whatever has been posted on the Facebook can be used to increase our knowledge or for conservation purposes. So that was the three major points we all had in mind when we started the project, the citizen science project. So now, as I'm talking about Dragonfly diversity informatics projects, in the coming few slides, I'll be discussing those in detail. So there are two types of projects that we have. One is the analytics project, which is basically downloading the data which is posted on Facebook or other social media, and then curation and analysis of that. And the second one is to generate interest and generate data, these two. This can be done by using various applications. So if we develop certain types of applications, perhaps people can come together and they start using this, and which will sort of boost up data collection. So that was the whole philosophy behind the projects that I'm going to talk about. And this is the project team. This is a project under MIT World Peace University, School of Computer Engineering and Technology, or CET, and School of Ecology and Environmental Management, where I teach, which is under Faculty of Sustainability Studies. So there are 5 students from computer engineering background who actually do not have any background in biodiversity research, or perhaps have never worked on such a problem earlier. And when they approached me and when I told them that, look, there is this idea, they got really excited and they thought that, this will be something of an, innovation. This is something which is very quite different because they come from a pure computer science background, and, diversity informatics is something completely new to them. We have 2 project collaborators, Dr. Vijay Barve from Kansas State University and Dr. Prosenjit Dawn from West Bengal. So both of them are experts in dragonflies and also biodiversity informatics. So most of the work that I'm going to present today is done by the 4 guys here: Yash Chaudhary, Yash Khare, Aditya, and Yash Tamania. And a part of it will be done later by Akriti, about which I'll talk in the last few slides. So this is quite a lot of interdisciplinary work where people from ecology background are working together with engineering background people and, coming up with very exciting results. Okay. So the projects are divided into 2 parts. One is the analytics and the second is the interface part. And in the analytics part, we wanted to download the Facebook data. We wanted to clean it, and then we wanted to analyze it. So the Facebook data extraction, that's a pipeline: first extraction, then cleaning and analysis. So when we extracted the Facebook data, we used certain APIs and Python code for extracting the data. Now I don't really know the nitty-gritties of all the technicalities of how this was done, but that's a pipeline which has been used. So in the data cleaning process, the JSON file format was converted to .csv so that we can analyze the data later on, and only the relevant information was extracted from the description. So typically, when people post in Facebook, especially a citizen science group like Dragonfly South Asia, we have certain rules which people follow. For instance, when they post an image, if they know the species identification, they write it in the beginning that this is black-winged bamboo tail or Dyspareunia quadrimaculata. This is the male, the location, the date. Okay, so they give at least that basic information and then they post the image. If they don't know the identification, they say ID please or unidentified species, and then they give the date and location and they post the image. So in many cases, almost 99% of the cases, people post images. they don't simply post text, or they don't simply say that I found stream Ruby in an area. So the Facebook group is actually driven by the photo records. So almost all the entries that we had extracted, all of them are connected to images, which is actually very good, because when you go for data cleaning or data curation, you have a reference image to check whether the identification is correct or not. So data with images is very relevant, because there is an evidence that someone has cited a species. That's first thing. And the second thing is, for the analysts, they can actually go back and see whether the observation is correct or not. So we extracted data that had an image associated with it. So that is what is we are calling it as relevant information, and also the location, date, and other things. For example, the author who has posted it. And eventually, after the data curation, the next step is the data analysis. So once a curated data set is created, then we can plot the species frequency, geographical distribution of the species, temporal distribution, and so on. So it's a quite a lengthy process as such. But if you could succeed in one of these, at least first or the second stage, then the third stage is quite simple, because that's a general analysis that you do on a database. So I'm going to show you some results that we have obtained from following the pipeline. And we downloaded the Dragonfly South Asia data, in which we found 13,300 records so far. So starting from the inception of the group in 2009 till 2020, January 2020, we have downloaded so many records. So that's a huge amount of data, which is sitting in a Facebook group, which has never been analyzed so far. And these 13,300 records, although some processing needs to be done on these records, there is some curation that is still remaining, but these are the preliminary findings. So in the map, you can see that the areas which are shown in purple or blackish color, they are the highest count. So there are certain districts of India which have reported the maximum number of species, or maximum number of count, or the entries, or the records, let's say.
Hello, can you hear me? Maybe
Yeah, you're audible.
maybe
Yeah, we
Pankaj
can hear
is
you.
another power cut. So hopefully he can join again. Pankaj, are you back? You are muted. If you, oh,
Yeah, sorry, got
doesn't work
disconnected.
again. Perfect. Hello, Neha, are you here? Is your internet working?
Yeah, I'm here.
Neha, maybe you would like to tell us a little bit about Dragonfly South Asia and would like to try to answer the first questions we have in the chat, or let's see if Pankaj can come back.
Yeah, I will just go to the chat box and try to see the questions. I don't see any questions over here. Can you?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, we can hear you, Pankaj.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Pankaj.
Am I audible?
Yes, Pankaj.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
we can.
Sorry,
We can
sorry.
hear.
Okay. Sorry, there is a lot of fluctuation of power here happening, so I'm really sorry for that. Okay.
Please go on.
So moving forward. So looking at the data structure, there are certain districts which have scored very high. These are the districts from where the data is quite a lot in number as such. So mostly, in the map, it is already shown, some districts which are shown in the red, very hot red or black coloration. These are the districts from where most of the data comes. We have also plotted it with respect to the districts and the number of counts. So you can see that the top districts are from southern India, from Kerala mainly. And then we have some metros, Thane, Pune, Kolkata, Howrah. So actually, if you look at the district-wise count, most of the data is coming from metro cities. And that's because people have easy access to the social media, or they are quite aware of using the social media for diversity data. And typically in metro cities in general, you will find even in the eBird data that there is a lot of observer bias when it comes to the metro cities. So we have also find similar observer bias, especially in the city areas. There are only a few districts which actually are not metro cities in which the data is collected. So what are the species that are recorded the most? So the first 4 species or 5 species, if you check, Trithemis aurora, Crocothemis, Orthotram sabina, Pantala, and Ischnura, these species are quite widespread as such. So it's again likely that people are posting data from the species that they spot in their neighborhood, because these 5 species are quite often encountered in your neighborhood in India. So perhaps that's again another bias in reporting. It may be either because they're quite widespread and you always find them, or it's just that people are reporting from their neighborhood and they are finding these species the most common species in their areas. So that is what our data suggests. There are some species which are cited, and for example, there are some species which are really beautiful as such, like this Neurobasis chinensis. It's one of the most beautiful damselfly that we have in India. So there are also certain aspects because of which people take pictures. So if a damselfly or a dragonfly looking really beautiful, they take picture. If it's a common or drab looking species, especially a female of a species, then they don't really take a picture. So it all depends on the perception of the observer. Now moving to the next project, which is generating interest in layman, or encouraging more and more layman participation in data collection. We thought that we give an interface to the people so that they find taxonomy to be a bit easy. In odonates, since they are quite visual insects, you can simply look at them and you can still identify them because they look beautiful, they have colors, and there are certain patterns that you can recognize. But many times, especially for the beginners or the kids, it becomes very easy to identify a species, And because of this, perhaps they do not go ahead with pursuing odontology as a field of their interest. So we thought that just to encourage layman participation, we can create a small application in which you simply take a picture of a dragonfly, and then that application will identify that dragonfly for you based on a artificial intelligence AI based image recognition process. So here is the pipeline for it. And you basically take a picture, and then you analyze this picture using the AI pipeline, and eventually you find the hits which are the most closest species to the species that you have just captured. So our data set is quite limited. We have just trained the data set for on 25 species, of which we could generate 50,000 images, which were accessible mainly from iNaturalist.org. So we found the most common species occurring in India, and these were like 25 species that we could narrow down. And we basically extracted 50,000 images of these species from iNaturalist, and then we trained our data set, our algorithm on these images. So now if you take that application on your Android, and you go out and take a picture of a particular dragonfly species, then it will identify out of the 25 which are trained. Okay, so the data set is limited, but again, the data set is only for the most common species that occur, in the city area, mainly in urban areas. So this is a very good educative tool as such, for especially for students and the beginners, just to get them learning or start learning the process. So here are some snapshots of how this AI app works. So here is an image taken in the smartphone, and then you click on classify, and then it will give you 3 hits. So the first hit is the Copera marginalis, and the confidence is 72%. So, and for others, the confidence is quite low, 7% and 5%. So you can be quite sure that the species that you are looking into is this particular Copera marginalis. Similarly, for other one, Trithemis aurora, 88%, and others are 10% and 1%. So in a sense, you are getting an indication of what species it might be. And then it, of course, triggers your curiosity. Like, that, okay, so this is Trithemis aurora. So let me check whether it's actually Trithemis aurora or not. So you will go to some other data sets, and, you will check how the Trithemis aurora looks like. And the species that I'm looking in front of me, is it the same or not? So you will tally it, So it basically generates curiosity, and also makes people learn on their own. So I think that is the USP of this particular app that we are developing, and that is also the idea behind it. So at times the accuracy or the confidence is dwindling, but that is still fine, because it gives an indication. It's not a 100% taxonomy tool. It is just an educative tool which can be used for just igniting the curiosity in the people to learn more. And with this, more and more, perhaps people will get interested in understanding dragonflies, learning more about it. And, that is, I think, where the key lies in the next project of data collection. So the last project that I'm going to discuss is about data collection in a very systematic manner, using a listing app, which is made specifically for collecting data on dragonflies. So again, the data collection using that app is a very simple process. Many of you might have used eBird app. So the app that we have generated is a similar app. It's just that instead of birds, you see dragonflies, and there is some more functionality to that app. So being a user, you log into the app, and then you get a list of species on which you can choose the species that you are seeing in the area where you are surveying. And then you can write down the details if there are any particular, there is a peculiar behavior you have observed, or there are some remarks that you want to add. You can add those. And then you have to also do a habitat review, so that you also provide habitat data, which is actually lacking in many apps. So many apps do not really collect data on habitat, which is actually very crucial because the species dependency is on habitat. And finally, this data is securely stored in our database and it can be retrieved later. So this is the interface of the app. This is the homepage, and you need to log in using the email ID and password, and you log in. Once you log in, then the date and the time will pop up, and you start creating your checklist by clicking on the checklist button. So once you click on it, the list of the species appears, and these are the I mean, this is not the complete list of species globally, but these are the species you are most you can most frequently encounter. So these are around 300 species of dragonflies and damselflies together found in India, which you encounter most frequently. In case you are not able to identify the species, you can click on unidentified species, and then you click on whichever species you find. You can write down their numbers. So as soon as you click on, let's say, Lestes mulbaricus, a new window can pop up, or you can click on Lestes mulbaricus and small window pops up and you can write the numbers in it, or you can write a remark in it. So once you're done with the list, you go for the review button, and then the next window opens. This is this one. So for instance, here is here is this group which was roaming around. They were traveling, and they were 5 of them total. And they basically saw 3 different species, of which Andamanicum was, the count was 2, Coccinensis was 2, and so on. So now they have added the diversity data. Now they have to go to the habitat review. So they can click on the habitat review. In case they want to add more species, they can simply click on the plus button and they can add more species. They can edit this later as well. And with this button, they can turn on their location so that the data has a location attached to it, a proper location like this when the final submission button comes. But when you click on the habitat review, it goes to another window in which there are some questions that we have asked, and they have to simply say yes, no, or choose from the options. So for example, what was there overhead canopy, was the surrounding habitat, how was it urban, scrubland, and so on. So there are just a few questions. It does not even take 2 minutes of your time to write these questions, but these are very important questions with respect to the habitat. Once this is done, they can submit, and then this list gets submitted, and a location is attached to it, a date, timestamp attached, and the observer name is attached. So basically all the data gets attached to each other, and finally it is saved in a particular file format, which is later on converted to Excel file format for the analysis. So if you want to retrieve the data will look something like this. So this is the ID. So this is the user ID, and these are the species name. This is the count, date, time, location. So location is in the form of lat long, and the details of the remarks. So if you have written any remarks, then it comes like this. Then the habitat types and other things. So this Excel file is actually similar to a data sheet that you will have when you're conducting a systematic survey of dragonflies. It's just that here you are using an app for it, and the app has got all the functionalities. So it's quite an easy process to obtain data for analysis, and it's also easy to store it. So it gets stored on a cloud server, and we have access to it as of now, but we are trying hard to make it public. But if that's not possible, we will be able to give the data set whenever asked. So it's a safe and secure way to do dragonfly watching. You don't really have to deal with a lot of paper or pen and other things. A smartphone is something that you always carry with you, and if there is an app for data collection on dragonfly in your smartphone, then I think is the easiest way to collect data. So altogether, these 3 projects are quite interlinked with each other, and we have done quite a lot of progress. So all this was done in last 3 months of time when we were all homebound and locked down, and the students have put in a lot of effort in developing the projects. But there are of course some challenges we are facing since we are all new to these diversity informatics. The main first challenge is the data that is on the Facebook. It's quite cluttered. There are so many errors in it. There are so many mistakes made, or it's not well organized data because it is not meant to be well organized. It is actually a simple interactive portal. So that's why the post extraction processing is quite tedious and it consumes a lot of time. But now onwards, if we tell our audience to organize their data and post the data in a certain manner, then perhaps for the future effort, it will be quite easier. Although we have been doing it for many years now, that we have been telling people to post in a certain manner, it's just that there is no consistency and it's just difficult. I mean, there are so many people who are posting every day, and many a time people don't really go through the guidelines, so it becomes quite messy at a later stage. As I mentioned earlier, our AI based app is just limited to ignite curiosity in the people, and it cannot be considered as a final or ultimate field identification kit in its current form, because we have only 25 species trained so far. So it's mainly for urban audience who want to connect their kids or the layman to the nature. The listing app also has some problems. The one is that we are storing it on a cloud on our personal server. So we are trying to make it open to everyone. But if that doesn't happen, then we will still have an option where the data can be retrieved from us. We are keeping it actually open for everyone as such. And we want to make it open because otherwise there is no use for the data. So these are the challenges that we are facing with the data set or the projects that we have developed so far. Now, in the coming few months, we are going to do data extraction from some representative regional groups. So just like the Dragonfly South Asia, which is a huge, bigger group, there are many regional groups on dragonflies, like dragonflies of Kerala or dragonflies and damselflies of West Bengal, Northeast, and so on. And typically in the regional groups, there is a limited audience and there is more control over the limited audience. That's why the data can be organized well, or people are posting more frequently because they want to interact with their own regional communities rather than interacting with a larger community. So that also happens, and that's why the data deposition in a bigger group versus a smaller group is quite disproportionate. So we want to test the same pipeline that we have created for extraction of the data from Dragonfly South Asia group to the regional groups, and want to check whether our pipeline is correct or not, whether we are doing it right or not, because then we can make that pipeline open for everyone so that people can use the same pipeline, same Python code they can use for extraction from other groups as well. We also want to improve our app interface and backend of the app. So we basically focused all our efforts in making the algorithm more and more stronger. So app interface is something that requires a lot many ideas and input from the people. So right now we are testing the app from our side, and we want to make it aesthetically better and also functionally better as well. So we are just working on it. So if you have any suggestions, or if you could help us in developing these ideas any further, with some technical inputs, then I am open to new collaborations, and your suggestions will always be welcome. So in summary, that there is a lot of power when it comes to participatory science, and community involvement in data collection. It can really give a boost in data accumulation. Over the last 15 years, we have been dealing with the community data, or citizen science, and we always underestimated. We never thought that citizen science data will be so powerful, but now we are actually seeing the results, and it's quite powerful. Social media can have a really strong influence on people, and especially in terms of biodiversity data collection. So we believe that social media can be utilized as a secondary source of data. The data is going to be with a lot of errors, but then experts need to sit on the data and they have to curate the data. Then only it becomes usable data as such. With the citizen science involvement, long-term planning can be done. Long-term data collection is possible, and that is what we are aiming through using this new app that we have built, which is the listing app. So we think that if we start now, in the year 2020, perhaps by 2025, we will have enough amount of data to comment on the dynamics of the populations of odonates, or various other factors like how the weather or the climate, how are the responses of the odonates to the climate change and so on. So there are so many questions that are still unanswered because the data is lacking, and only a systematic data collection framework can lead us to answering these questions. So this is where I wrap up my session. So here is my mailing address and my email and website. You can check these out. And now I'm open for question and answer session.
Hello, Pankaj.
Yeah, Neha.
Yeah, hi. I can see one question in the chat box. Can I read it out to you?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Yeah. So, how can we support population of different dragonfly and damselfly species, like at home or making ponds or etc.? This is the first question. The question is, how is research funded and what are some future findings?
Okay. Very interesting questions indeed. So yes, definitely you can make a pond in your neighborhood, and you can observe dragonflies over there. So that's possible. Dragonfly gardening is a new concept that is born recently, and people have been making conducive habitats for the dragonflies to be seen around their neighborhood. Since dragonflies are apex predators in an insect ecosystem, they do keep in control the pest, the mosquitoes and other pests. So people want dragonflies in their neighborhood, and they are going for landscaping in such a sense that the dragonflies will be found in the neighborhood. So yes, making small ponds in your neighborhood is a good idea to attract dragonflies. And they also need some certain type of habitat like grasses, especially for damselflies, or
Yes.
some substrate like rock areas, in case of dragonflies to perch and so on. So there are many ideas when it comes to landscaping, and perhaps we can have a session later on only for landscaping for dragonflies. So that's possible. Okay, so then next question, how is research funded and what are the possible future fundings? Well, this research, the bit of research that I presented was not at all funded, and we thought that we can do it on our own. Well, the data collection as a part of Dragonfly South Asia meetings has been happening since 2014, and actually even before that. So it's quite a voluntary movement as such. We have been conducting meetings just to provide an interface for the people to know each other, and to come to a common platform and get connected with us. So there we are charging them some nominal workshop fees, which actually covers their stay and food, and other expertise and the value of other expertise and so on, which is quite nominal. So we are actually not generating much research fund from the activities that we conducted. So in the future, the only thing is that if we want to make these apps open to public, then perhaps there is a cost associated with it, and this cost is the maintenance cost. That needs to be recovered somewhere. And the second cost is maintaining a server space, so which requires some funding. So we have actually submitted the proposal to an innovation contest run by Government of India, and we are just crossing our fingers and thinking that we will get selected for such an innovative project. If we get some funds from them, then we can definitely work on the apps and complete the process, and then make also buy the server space. But if that doesn't happen, then perhaps we will need to look for other options of funding. The third question, have you thought of a worldwide Dragonfly platform? Yes, we did. Actually, when we started, really did not have, making the apps only specifically for India in mind. We were looking for something bigger as such. So we came across many portals. Like there was this one portal called observation.org, where it's a European portal, but you can provide the species list and then they can give access to you. But it's quite tedious. Like it's not that easy. It's not a user-friendly portal. So even we had a presence in India Biodiversity portal, which is again not very user-friendly. So we were always thinking that we should have something separate only for a specific taxa, that is dragonflies. And eventually, when the students approached, then I thought that it will be a good platform even for them to learn and create something which nobody has really tried. And that's why we went for making these apps for Indian dragonflies. But in future, we are really looking forward to collaborations across, so that we can make this open to global dragonfly data sets. We can make the taxonomy app as well as the listing app for the global odonata, not only for India.
Talking about the fundings, I think we can also
Okay, I think Neha got disconnected. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer. Okay, so someone is asking, it would be great to know about commonly occurring dragonfly and damselfly species in some of the online webinar. Yes, we have conducted many webinars. Actually, there are some recordings also available on YouTube. If you can identify yourself, I can share those links with you.
Well, I'm Gunwan Joshi. I'm a retired scientist from Pollution Control. I got interested in dragonflies and damselflies because basically my field of studies was limnology, that is the lake science.
Yes.
And during my field visits, I came across many of these species, and that is how I got interested in them. One of my friend, he was working on reproductive biology of some odonates.
Okay.
So that was another reason for me, because he used to come to my laboratory garden, and where we had a pond and lot of aquatic macrophytes, free floating macrophytes like Sylvia and so on. So that is how I got interested in, and maybe now I am retired, so I can maybe devote quite a lot of my time to all these aspects.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I have written my email ID, so please write to me. I will share the links with you.
Well, great. Thank you very much.
Yes. Neha, you were saying something, no?
Yeah, I was saying that about the funding. We can also take help from corporate funding.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is one option, of course. I mean, we are open to it. It's just that there is no direct commercial aspect attached to these apps. So these are not, the funding can only come from a CSR project, corporate social responsibility kind of projects. Well, these apps cannot be commercialized as such. That is the thing. Okay, so there is one more question. Are there special plants dragonflies and damselflies need for laying eggs, etc.? Yes, there are some plants, but they look for instance, some damselflies, they rely on aquatic plants to lay their eggs, underwater. But it's not a species specific association. I mean, there is not a very strong correlation between which species of plant you should plant. depending upon the availability of various plants, they will choose the right plant for them for laying eggs. So they need a substrate as such, and the substrate quality can vary. I mean, it can be different species of plants as well. But looking at the natural streams, so the species that grow near the natural streams and where you see certain damselflies, we recommend those types of grasses. So we do have a list of plants, which sort of attract dragonflies. They don't really attract as such. It's just that they are the most suitable plants, one can say. Any more questions? If there are any suggestions on the app, I would really be happy to listen to you. So my whole team is here. Yash Chaudhary, Aditya Hundekari, Yash Damania, and Yash Khare. All of them are here. So these are the people who created the pipeline and created the apps. So if you have any technical question, you can also ask it here. They are here. They are on standby. Okay, so my email ID is shared in the chat box. It's pankajkopade@gmail.com. Or you can also write to me on pankaj.kopade@mitwpu.edu.in, and I'll be happy to answer your queries. So I'm again displaying my email ID and the website ID on the screen. So if you haven't written it, please write it down. If you have any queries, please write to me, and I'll be happy to respond you back. So thank you everyone for your attention and the responses. I really enjoyed this talk.
Thank you, Pankaj.
Thank you very much, Pankaj, and thank you all for your awesome work and research and conservation that you're doing and what you are developing and establishing. And it's really awesome, and we are so grateful to collaborate together with you. And we're looking forward to all collaboration with Dragonfly South Asia and with you and Rewild Institute and all the great projects we can bring to life and develop in the future. And thank you so much for everything that you've done and you're doing. And we are all very much looking forward to future collaborations. And good luck for all the projects you're doing, and looking forward to hear you very soon and to exchange ideas and to develop projects together. Thank you so much, Pankaj.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you. Thanks a lot. All right, I think then we can wrap up this session. Please write to me in case of queries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, in the name of European Wilderness Society, I would also like to thank you, Pankaj, for this nice presentation, and everyone else for asking questions and interacting.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, bye.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.